until the last 3 pages, at which point I wanted to throw it across the room and then set it on fire. But we'll get to that in a minute. Hi, my name is Sarah and I love to talk about books, and today I'm going to be wrapping up November because if you can't tell from all my little friends behind me, it's December now. We are so over November, so let's wrap it up and put it to bed so we can enjoy the festive season. And yes, there is a Christmas tree beside me, but that can wait until next week where I put up some festive videos. I don't want to bombard you with tinsel too soon. I read 6 books in November, and so today I've got 2 5 stars, 3 4 stars and a 3-star book to share with you. And as usual, I'm going to kick off with my 5 stars because I think they deserve the most attention, but do stick around for the other books in my wrap up, because just because I didn't rate something 5 stars, it doesn't mean that you wouldn't. So my first 5-star read was Donna Tartt's The Little Friend. This is my 3rd Donna Tartt, but it's the one that I've put off for the longest. It sat on my shelf for 18 years, if you can believe that. I bought it when my oldest son was a baby, tried to read it then and just was not in the headspace and have never picked it up since. But after I read The Goldfinch either last year or the year before and really enjoyed that, and then I read The Secret History, which I absolutely adored earlier this year, I decided it was time to give this one a try, and don't tell the others, but I think this one's my favourite. So this is the story of Harriet, who as the youngest of 3 children was just a baby when her older brother Robin was killed when he was 10 in the family's back garden. And now that she's approaching the age that he was when he died, she has decided that she is going to solve the mystery of what happens to him. But although his death is a mystery, this is not a mystery or thriller book. Really, you get immersed in the life of this headstrong little girl and her family, who are a complete cast of characters. There's also the kind of wrong side of the tracks family of drug dealers, one of whom Harriet is convinced is behind her brother's death. In the space of one summer, Harriet and her little sidekick Helly manage to get themselves into some quite dangerous situations and draw the wrath of the men that they seek to punish. They test the limits of their friendship, all the while kind of operating just under the radar of being able to understand what's actually going on in the adult world around them. This is probably the biggest book that I've read this year. It is a chunker, but not once did it feel like that. I think Donna Tartt is just such an incredible writer. I can read pages and pages of her writing where nothing really happens, but an awful lot is said. From family relationships to children's perspectives of the adult world, from crystal meth addiction, mental health, race relations with the help, even, religious snake charmers. I could literally read anything that she chose to write about. So that there was actually a compelling storyline to draw all this together was just, for me, an added bonus. I've seen a lot of other reviewers on Goodreads saying that this book is too long, that it could have been edited, that it should have had, like 100 or so pages cut out of it. And could it have? Maybe, probably, but then it would have just been like every other book. And I think the specialness, I'm clearly not a writer like Donna Tartt, but what makes this book so special is Donna Tartt's writing. This book is out there on a ledge of its own, balancing on one foot and giving not one single fuck how many pages it takes to find out whether it will fall or not. And that is what makes Donna Tartt really one of my favourite writers. I just thought this was brilliant. For me, it doesn't fall off that ledge, it flies. I adored this. My next 5-star read was also by quite a beloved author. This is a short story collection called To Be a Man by Nicole Krauss. I got it as a NetGalley, and I was a little bit nervous about going into it. I read The History of Love a few years ago and I loved it so much that I was actually a little bit scared to read any more of her work in case it didn't live up to my expectations. But it turns out I've been depriving myself needlessly, because if this short story collection is anything to go by, I don't think Nicole Krauss could ever disappoint me. This is one of the best books I've read all year, which is a bit of a spoiler for a video I've got coming up after Christmas. But It's definitely one of the best short story collections that I've ever read. I don't think there was a single story in this collection that I didn't enjoy, and I don't really feel like it had the peaks and troughs that short story collections so often have. Even the shortest of the stories in this collection felt fully fleshed out and resolved, and I think that's quite hard to get right in the short story format. From the very first story, this collection had my heart. It's about a young girl who's exploring her sexuality and gets into quite a dangerous situation, and the story is told by one of her more naive dorm mates, but with the hindsight of her telling it in older life, so she can apply her adult perspective to it. And there's a story about an elderly man who is really driven to protect his newborn grandson from the pressures and constraints of tradition and history. That really got me, that story. It nearly made me cry. Krauss explores a lot of themes rooted in the Jewish experience, which, as I'm not Jewish and I don't really know anyone who is, it's not something that I knew a lot about, so I learned a lot through this book as well. I think what I like about Krauss is that she gets to the core of feelings and emotions, and sometimes some of the most powerful things that she puts across are those that are left unsaid. I just think she's really a great storyteller, and I'm really glad that I finally broke the seal and read some more of her stuff. I have Great House on my TBR trolley, so hopefully I will get to that soon as well, because I'm no longer scared to read more of her books. My first 4-star read was the Shelterbox Book Club pick for November, and it was A Woman of Firsts, The Midwife Who Changed the World by Edna, Adan, Ismail, and this is a memoir. And Edna was, or is, I think she's still alive, whoops. Edna is from Somaliland, and I think it's an understatement to say that she achieved a lot. And it's a good job that this is a memoir, because I think if this had been a work of fiction, it wouldn't have been published, because the things that she has done and the things that she has been through are completely almost unbelievable, and the trail of change that she has blazed really has to be read in her own words to be believed. So as a child of a respected but overworked doctor in Somaliland, Edna's destiny was kind of set as she decided to follow in his footsteps. And even from childhood, she defied what a girl was supposed to be, particularly in Somaliland. And she took the path less, or probably never, travelled, by getting herself an education, travelling to Britain to train as a midwife and nurse, and to become a voice for people who didn't have one. Even the glamour of being Somaliland's first lady couldn't distract Edna from the laser focus she had on her mission, which was to improve healthcare and opportunities for her people, particularly women. So against culture, tradition, religion, and even in the face of persecution and abuse, she fought to address issues such as dangerous traditional practices, FGM, and even civil war and dictatorships to make a real difference in Somaliland. This is not always an easy read. To raise awareness, Edna is unflinching in her discussion of things like the ingrained mistreatment of women, the dangerous repercussions of untrained birth attendants, and even her own experience of undergoing FGM. But these are not told for shock value. They are used as examples of drivers for the change and positivity that Edna was passionate about working towards. And it's that positivity and drive that, even though there are tough topics to read about in this book, it's still a really uplifting read. Someone with Edna's commitment and work ethic is really inspiring to read about. It's very admirable, and I doubt she'd have made the changes that she did if she hadn't had that, that laser sharp focus and drive towards her aim. But part of me does feel angry on her behalf that she had to commit her life and make so many sacrifices in order to fill that groaning gap in healthcare in Somaliland. It shouldn't be down to one person or a small minority to do that, and I'm glad for her that she found her passion and her, her life's work in that. But it just makes me very sad at how much she had to sacrifice in order to make those changes. This book's really engagingly written. Most of the chapters end on some form of cliffhanger, and you can't help but turn the pages. I think I learned so much about not just Edna from this book, but also Somaliland, international aid with all of its pitfalls, and the experience of living in a time of conflict. And for me, her passion for childbirth and safe practices it really touched the core of me, and it has inspired me to want to explore what my options are for possibly returning to midwifery at some point in the future. I heard the midwife that all women deserve, and it's just really reawoken that passion in me as well. So I just thought this was a brilliant book. And then back to NetGalley for my next 4-star read, and this was Homecoming: Voices of the Windrush Generation by Colin Grant. This book is both a time capsule and a really poignant message for our times. What Grant has done is stitched together this patchwork of voices from the Windrush generation and their children, and in doing so he's given us this beautiful picture of all their really rich experiences, but also turns the lens back on us in Britain and the wider West, to look at our enduring attitudes towards colonialism and immigration. So if you're not from the UK, or if you're just not aware, the Windrush generation were Caribbean immigrants that came over between kind of the end of the Second World War up until the 60s. They were part of the British Empire. They were seen as citizens of the empire as the Caribbean had been colonised, and so they were encouraged to come to Britain because there were real issues with the workforce after the wars. They were kind of painted this picture of England being the perfect place to be, and when they came over, the reality was much, much different. And in more recent years, there has been a political scandal that's come to light, where a lot of the people of this generation have been treated really badly by the government, and had their status kind of revoked and made illegal. So I'm a Scottish YouTuber, but anyone watching will realise that I do not have a Scottish accent, and that is because I spent a lot of my childhood growing up near London, and so I was just used to seeing people of Caribbean or West Indian, or even Indian and Pakistani origin in the community, and it was not something that I ever really questioned as to how these people had ended up in the UK. And it's only in recent years that I've really got to understand that these people didn't come to the UK just randomly or on the off chance that it might be better here. It was the result of colonialism and that big propaganda machine that said that Britain was their homeland and that they could have a much better life if they came here. These were the promises fed to populations that the empire exploited, but they turned out to be hollow once people arrived in the UK. They had, they'd given up their homes, their families, they'd left their loved ones behind, and they'd made the long journey to Britain, to our supposedly superior shores. But as shown by the first-hand oral histories that are in this book, the reality was often very different. These are lived experiences where prejudice, isolation, and income inequalities were rife, and often meant that people were not able to afford the sort of life that had been promised to them, but also couldn't afford to return home once that reality bit. West Indian people were treated appallingly by a population that was not prepared to accept them, and a government that backtracked on its word. So with all that said, you would expect quite a gloomy book, but this is anything but gloomy. The spirit of the Windrush generation really shines through this. Their perseverance, their optimism, and their positivity enabled so many of them, despite so many odds stacked against them, to carve out an existence in a country that made them feel very unwelcome. So whether it was their ingenious way of getting around barriers to accessing mortgages and being able to own properties, or whether it was bringing things like the culture of carnival to the UK, from boycotting prejudiced employers and simply trying to create a community, many of them were able to reclaim a lot of the promises that had been made to them when they first came here, making a life for themselves and their families. And just the joy that shines through from a lot of the encounters in this book. I could have read so many more accounts from the Windrush generation. I just thought it was a fascinating read how their voices are preserved in this book. They are told verbatim, and I really enjoyed that aspect of the book. Grant doesn't get into a lot of the details of the political scandal that has brought the Windrush generation to the fore in the past decade. Things like the hostile environment policies, which were disgusting, but purposefully encourage making life difficult for people of the Windrush generation to force them to leave, to actually stamping people with illegal immigrant status. And there are some voices in this book of people who have been effectively expelled from the country. But what this book really focuses on is the lives of this generation, the lives that they left behind in the West Indies. And I learned so much about that culture under colonialism. I thought that was really interesting, but also the lives that they managed to make here. And I particularly loved the the deep dive into the eccentricities and the importance placed on the front room of the house. I just feel like, particularly when we term them just as the Windrush generation, it kind of boxes them in. But when you read this book, you realise how rich those lives are and how many diverse personalities and experiences contribute to that generation. And this is such a rich picture of them. And I think we as Westerners can learn a lot about the courage and stamina that it takes to be an immigrant, and just what richness and diverse culture that we can all enjoy if we open our borders and our hearts and our minds to people from different countries. And at the same time, it also throws into sharp focus the disgusting way that we still do treat people in this country, and particularly when they are immigrants, and really should serve as a learning opportunity for anyone reading it. So interesting, educational, but also heartwarming, and lights a bit of a political fire. So I really did enjoy that one. And my last 4-star read was again another NetGalley. This time it was The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. And Matt Haig is someone who has been on the periphery of my awareness for a while now. I know that he talks quite openly about mental health, that he's passionate about the destigmatization. He's talked about his own mental health as well, but actually this is the first time I've picked up one of his books. And it was the premise that hooked me into this book. Nora Seed has decided to take her own life and finds herself in a world between life and death, in which there is a library, and this library has an infinite number of books, and they are all about Nora. Each book is the result of a different decision or choice that she has made throughout her life, all the billions of different crossroads that we can take. So whether it was saying yes to a coffee with someone, or the decision to keep her cat indoors rather than let him out, whether it was to study geology rather than philosophy, or keep up her competitive swimming, whether it was keeping the band together or choosing to walk away, or marrying a certain person, or moving to Australia with her friend. All these lives are captured in these books, and Nora gets to try these lives on for size to see if any of them could convince her to choose to live. I often hear depression explained as the dwelling on past experiences, and for me that has always hit the right note. I've been depressed pretty much all of my adult life, and how you can feel despair or misery in the moment is often the result of choices that you made. It could be years earlier, and at times it can feel all-consuming to live with whatever those past choices have resulted in, and it can feel like nothing you ever do will get you clear of the weight and misery that's pressing down on you that those past decisions have brought you to. Nora gets to that point and makes the only choice that she sees open to her to check out. And I think in Nora, Matt Haig has created a brilliant character. I think too often in literature, depressed people are often painted as the result of some massive trauma that, you know, that everyone can see is a valid reason to be depressed. But the reality is that it's often a series of smaller cuts that can bring a person to that state of mind. And I really appreciated that Matt Haig has decided not to add that element of drama to all the situations that bring Nora to her knees. And then we get to the library and all that it offered, and this is so much fun. Matt Haig tackles some really deep-rooted and existential issues that can contribute to depression, but he does it in such an entertaining way. This book is actually quite a light read considering the premise. It's playful and it's comical, and at times it's actually just a bit silly, but in the best possible way. It might be easy to judge elements of this book as being almost schmaltzy, but you guys know that my tolerance for schmaltz is very small, and even this miserable cow was able to completely get in with the message of this book. It's a pure and loving message about finding the key to unlocking meaning and happiness in life. And not in the sense that, you know, you're handed the key and everything's fine, because I know, being one of them, that there are many people who can be given that key but still can't figure out how to operate the lock. But I still appreciate people like Matt Haig who keep reminding us that, you know, we all have it within us to get past those barriers when we are ready and able to. And I appreciated something as I was reading, that it's stories like this that aren't too intense and do offer that uplifting message that, you know, they stop me from throwing away that key in frustration that I can't get it to work. And yeah, this is definitely a book that gave me the warm and fuzzies. I thought it was really good. And then my final book was a 3-star read, and it was Agatha Christie's Taken at the Flood. This is a Hercule Poirot mystery, and this is the first Agatha Christie I've ever read. And I knew going into it that people had said this isn't one of her best. And, you know, I've never really been that inspired to read her. I wasn't expecting to get a lot out of this going into it, but I actually really enjoyed this. I found it a lot fresher than I thought I was going to, and I was thinking, you know, if this isn't her at her best, I can't wait to read more. And so this was well on its way to being a solid 4-star read until the last 3 pages, at which point I wanted to throw it across the room and then set it on fire. But we'll get to that in a minute. But first, what is this book about? So on the surface, this is about a suspected gold digger, Rosaline, who, after her first husband, Mr. Underhay, dies in Africa, travels to America and meets the fabulously wealthy Gordon Claude. They get married, they return to London, but within a few days, Gordon Claude is dead after a bomb hits their house during the Blitz. As a result, Rosaline inherits all of his money and effectively cuts out the rest of the Claude family, who have relied on funds from Gordon to effectively keep their lives, businesses and homes afloat. But then a message comes from beyond the grave to imply that Rosaline's first husband, Mr. Underhay, is not actually dead, and therefore, if that's true, Rosaleen was never officially actually married to Gordon Claude, and it means that the family can benefit from his original will. So for the Claude family, there appears to be a light at the end of the tunnel. Unfortunately, that light is blocked by a dead body turning up at the inn in the village that they live in, and in steps Mr. Poirot. But if you look beyond the story, this book is really about the motivations, corruptions and dependencies that money can result in. Now, I'll admit some of the parts of this book felt needlessly complicated, and I think that was just to throw the reader off the scent from some of the more obvious parts of the mystery. But I'll admit that I was still surprised by the outcome, even though I guessed one of the facets of it quite early on. And I could absolutely see why Christie has endured in the literary world so long. What I couldn't understand or excuse are those last 3 pages. And I'm trying to do this as delicately as possible to avoid spoilers, but there is a decision made by a character that I think is pretty appalling and can't even be justified by the fact that this was, you know, written in a different time, or even by that character's certain penchant for excitement. Because if we try to excuse or explain it, it negates so much of that character's other traits, so it just doesn't make sense. And as another Goodreads reviewer succinctly put it, it's fucking bullshit. And if it's characteristic of how Christie is, I don't think I'd read more of her. So I know I've got quite a few Agatha Christie readers who are subscribed to my channel. Please, someone advise me, is this just a turd in her canon, or am I likely to feel this angry at the end of most of her books? So that was my November. Quite a good reading month. Not as many books as I would have liked, but some really, really good books in there. What did you read in November? Have you read any of those books? Have I sparked your interest to look into any of these books any further? Let me know in the comments below. You know I always love to chat books. And I feel I have to say this here because I'm feeling so guilty. I am so behind in watching everyone else's videos. I'm trying to catch up, but the more I try, and now it's Vlogmas as well, and I know a lot of you guys are joining in with that, I just feel like I'm on a treadmill going nowhere. So I might need to just draw a line under it and pick up from this week, because I feel like I'm missing out on so much by being so behind. And I miss you guys as well. I want to comment on more videos. So if you have realised that I haven't been commenting on your videos, I'm really sorry, and thank you for everyone who still comments on mine. If you're new to this channel and you like what you see, then I would love it if you hit the subscribe button. But yeah, like I kind of hinted at earlier in the video, I've got a couple of more festive videos coming up for December. I'm not taking part in Vlogmas. There's just no way I could do a video a day. Like, I struggle with a video a week. So good luck to you who are doing it. I'm really looking forward to seeing your videos, but yeah, I'm not joining in that fun. So I'll wrap it up here, and I look forward to seeing you next week. So until then, bye. Down below. Oh no, that looks a bit rude.